Tonn Ostergard is with us, as I mentioned, of course, President and CEO of Crete Carrier Corporation. Hey, Tonn, good morning.
Good morning, Dave. How are you today?
Doing great. Thanks for being with us here this morning.
How's the weather in Louisiana today?
Well, it depends on what day. It was hellacious yesterday. It's beautiful today, and it's going to go back to yesterday's weather tomorrow. The South is really getting pummeled, I should say, with bad springtime weather. Of course, it's kind of a different situation for you guys. You get it winter and spring, so I guess we're one season ahead of you, Tonn.
Yeah. Well, good to be with you this morning, and great to talk to all the great truck drivers all across the country that dial in and listen to you every morning.
Well, Tonn, last time we talked, we were there in Lincoln and the great hospitality. In fact, we were talking about that just the other day on the program. But trucking, of course, has its laundry list of issues, some large, some small, and sometimes the seemingly small things are more critical than others. The whole country is really concerned about our infrastructure, the tragedy in Atlanta notwithstanding, but it kind of gives you an idea of how critical our infrastructure is, even though that was a man-made catastrophe as opposed to a bridge just falling down. Although we've seen that, it really points out if it happened here, if it happened there, if that happened in several places all at once. So how trucking would be crippled and how the economy would be crippled. So what I'm getting at here, the long way around, and I apologize for that, is you kind of got to pick your battles and you kind of got to prioritize. And I would imagine there was quite a bit of discussion before the meeting in Washington with President Trump.
Yes, sir. Dave, what our group that came together actually was at the request of the administration. The transition team had really reached out to ATA and said, can you assemble a group of trucking CEOs who can advise us on infrastructure issues, not just projects, but also the real challenge of how do you fund those projects. And so we've been meeting telephonically and in person several times, really since early to mid-December, talking about this agenda and putting together our thoughts in preparation of the opportunity to not only visit with the president, but other key leaders in Congress and within the administration on this very, very important issue, not only for the commerce of our country, which the highways and byways are such a vital part to, but also national security, that our infrastructure and our highway system, interstate highway system, is really integral to our total country's well-being.
There was a program, and I think it's in existence still in some way, the Highway Watch program. When does that go back to? I guess the early 2000s, if not the 90s. And that you bring up national security here, I think, is really critical because we don't hear about that much anymore in terms of trucking.
Yeah. Well, it certainly is, and our drivers are such a vital part of that. When you years ago, shortly after 9/11, I think there was that watch program where they just asked the drivers who were seeing what's going on out there just to have a watchful eye and bring to the attention anything that might be of concern. So, but back to our visit with the president, which was just truly a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and such an honor for me to be there, not only representing our companies, Crete, Schaefer, and Hunt, but the industry at large. And we had a very diverse group of 10 CEOs, and also, which I thought was very, very appropriate, members of the America's Road team, which were, frankly, they were the hit of the day in terms of our time with the president. He really gravitated towards and was quite taken by the outstanding professionals we had in the room with us, representing all of the drivers in the industry.
I'm going to, we'll kind of get into maybe some of the nuts and bolts, if you will, of the discussion and some of the emphases and your takeaway, and maybe the takeaway of the group at large, because you certainly know these folks and you talk and have, as you say, have been kind of in this process since December. But wow, you see in fact, Designated Survivor is one of our favorite TV shows right now. We've seen a lot of television, movies, with reproductions of the Oval Office. What is it? I mean, can you describe what it was like to actually be in the White House, in that room?
Well, it was just a thrill, and I've had the good fortunate to have been there in the past with some prior administrations as well. But our group gathered first on the south lawn, the south portico of the White House, and it was a momentous day in that for the first time, 2 trucks were brought in, and so we had 2 trucks, great photo ops there with those trucks on the south lawn, and I think a lot of you have seen the images of President Trump climbing in the truck, pulling the air horn, and really enjoying his time in the truck. As a matter of fact, he did make a comment. He says, "If I wasn't the president, I think I'd be a truck driver." So it was a fun moment there on the South Lawn before we went into the White House, just to share that with the president, and also Vice President Pence was there as well. So it was a great opportunity and just a great chance for our drivers to showcase what they do.
Did when we talk to our listeners, we emphasize the fact that they need to establish a personal relationship with their representatives, their congressmen, their senators, both locally and on a national basis, because a lot of these folks are making decisions and having a direct effect on folks' lives, but they really don't know trucking, and they shouldn't. Why should they know trucking? They may know that's a truck and that's a trailer, and that pretty much is it, and they kind of equate the trucking industry / lifestyle to other areas of the economy that they are familiar with. What sense did you get from the leadership there when you visited this time, that they had a good handle, if you will, on the industry and what really makes the industry tick?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the ATA, the American Trucking Association, and their leadership did a great job of setting that stage and making sure they understood the key statistics about how vital our industry is and how we truly do keep America moving. And it is the truck drivers who keep America moving. Anybody can buy a truck, anybody can buy a trailer, but at the end of the day, it's the men and women behind the wheel that make the difference. And so I think the ATA did a great job of kind of giving some bullet points and some high-level information that emphasized the importance of trucking industry to the economy and the country overall. So I do think, I know there was a tremendous amount of respect and appreciation that the president showed and shared in some of his comments about the industry. So I think that message was heard loud and clear.
Trucking, and we talk about this quite a bit on the program, is and I'll just go ahead and say one of the few areas now, maybe internet startup companies is probably another in a completely different arena. But trucking is one of the few areas where one person can just start off by eventually buying one truck and wind up with a company with hundreds of trucks. In other words, it's the perfect opportunity for true entrepreneurship, and one of the few that is left to the individual here. Was that at all brought up? In other words, because Trump himself is an entrepreneur, of course. Was there any kind of realization there in terms of how important it is to, business?
Oh, absolutely, Dave. I mean, the president did recognize the the entrepreneurship, that's really fundamental in our industry. We had representatives of FedEx and UPS from the largest size companies to smaller companies, and so it was a good cross section that showed that our industry is made up of all types and sizes of companies, and again, ultimately, it comes down to the driver. We can all have great companies, but at the end of the day, you got to have great drivers behind the wheel to make the difference and deliver that freight. So that's what the president took away. And one of the neat moments, Dave, was when we did gather in the cabinet room, which was a thrill to be seated around the cabinet room. As I said later, we were at the board table of the most powerful nation in the world, sitting there where all those decisions are made, and that was just a humbling experience. But as we all went around, after the president made some opening comments, at which time he did reiterate the importance of the trucking industry, we all went around the room and introduced ourselves. And as each member of the road team introduced themselves, the president was just stunned at how many millions of miles these drivers have driven accident-free, and in many, many cases without a ticket. And at each time he paused and says, "You got to be kidding me. How do you drive 3-4 million accident-free miles, no tickets?" He was truly just stunned at the accomplishments of those drivers, and that's what I was most taken by, was how he identified with the drivers, and they were the true stars of the day with respect to carrying the banner for our industry.
Well, there were 12, as you know, there were 12 road team members there at the meeting. In fact, I know some of those guys personally, and I know some of them are listening right now. But as the numbers break down, within that 12, they are right at 30 million accident-free miles. It is stunning.
Yeah, it was, and to that end, the president spoke. He says, "My gosh, how do you do that on the roads as they exist today, given the not just the conditions of the road, but the congestion that we are faced with, and all the issues that creates." So he recognized the relationship between infrastructure and safety, and how our drivers do their job every day. And so that again, I think was a great moment when he connected the dots, if you will, between the importance of infrastructure, safety, and delivering freight for our country.
Other than the folks in Atlanta, who obviously are getting a real dose of the importance of infrastructure now, and of course, as I say, that was a act of arson, not a crumbling bridge per se. But it's great for the trucking industry to know what's going on, and we do. It's great for the administration to know what's going on. I think they do. But the general public, are we still kind of behind the eight ball when it comes to making folks around the country truly understand what the stakes are here?
Well, I think so. I mean, first of all, everybody, depending on where they live, they have their morning or evening frustrations as they commute to and from work, and just the congestion issues. So I think it's multifaceted. It's not only the condition, the physical condition of our highways and bridges and the safety issues that represents, but it's also a congestion issue that's probably felt a little more each day by people. But it's certainly a message we have to continue to preach and help people understand. And ultimately, it's how are we going to pay for those projects when we do get them on the drawing board.
Yeah, that's the thing. There are quite a number of possible at least partial solutions, and maybe if you cobble together 2 or 3 of those, we might see some kind of formula that could put enough money and manpower behind that. But Peter DeFazio has come up with a pretty interesting idea in terms of selling bonds to pay for to roads, raising $500 billion, I think. Obviously everything is on the table. I'm not going to ask you to go through these But are you guys looking, along with the administration, at a number of solutions here, or are we still kind of searching for some type of guidance, I guess?
Well, I think like anything, there's always multiple solutions, multiple approaches that need to be looked at, whether it be the public-private sort of partnerships that have been discussed, to just the logical one related to fuel taxes. You can talk about issuing bonds, but ultimately you got to repay those bonds, and so what's going to be the source of revenue generated to pay a bond? And so that's the critical thing. We have to have a program that's sustainable for the long term. There's lots of discussions about short term sort of fixes, repatriation of foreign dollars, etc. That may be a one-time shot in the arm. We need a long-term solution that's going to carry us forward for decades to come. And so, from the industry standpoint, we're a proponent, if used correctly, that fuel taxes is a true user fee that we can collect based off of the miles and driven to pay for the infrastructure that we all depend on.
Tonn Ostergard is with us. He's president, CEO of Crete Carrier Corporation. Tonn, I want to thank you again for taking time to kind of give us a debriefing of the meeting last week there in Washington, D.C. 10 executives, 12 drivers at the White House. Besides, and of course, the emphasis and the reason for the meeting was to point up trucking's place in the economy, obviously, and then the crisis that we're in, and I think that's a word that can be used safely here, our infrastructure crisis. Were there other things that were brought up? Were there any surprises in terms of maybe some of the questions that you were asked?
Well, one of the other issues, timing-wise, Dave, we were there on Thursday. The vote for the health care bill was scheduled to be that night. It was later postponed and then ultimately pulled on Friday. So there was a fair amount of discussion about health care as well and the importance of health care. And we emphasized very much to the president that affordable health care, well managed for our employees, for our drivers and their families, is critical. And so we did spend a fair amount of time just discussing healthcare and its importance to our industry and the country as well.
At this point, are there any more meetings kind of like this on the horizon? How much will trucking be included in the process of coming up with some infrastructure solutions?
We're hopeful that when the agenda does come back more specifically to a infrastructure bill, that we will have another chance to meet, if not with the president, at least other senior members of the administration, Secretary of Transportation, etc. But we're hopeful that the president will have us back. He alluded to that when the agenda does turn to more specific infrastructure legislation, that he wanted our input. So we're hopeful we'll have that opportunity.
Indeed. Well, let us know if that happens, and we'll certainly get on it.
Sure.
Well, Tonn, I want to thank you so much for sharing the experience with us. What did I leave out, though, before we leave?
I think we covered it all. It's just always a pleasure for me, Dave, to be on your show and just give a shout out to all the great drivers out there on the road, for all the companies, specifically our drivers, the Crete, Schaefer, and Hunt. We're always so proud of the great job all truck drivers do in keeping this country going. So, and you do a great job of providing a show that reaches out to them. So, thank you for all you do as well, Dave.
Well, thank you for being part of it here as a sponsor. We greatly value our relationship, Tonn. And, hey, you're welcome all the time. Don't let Tim Ashaw be here all the time.
All right. Take care.
Just kidding, of course. So we'll probably see Tim next month. Tonn Ostergard, everybody. Tonn is the president, CEO of Crete Carrier. I just want to take a moment, though, before we go into news and weather, to read the list of the folks who were there, the drivers who were there. Steve Fields out of Independence, Missouri with YRC, Ralph Garcia, Albuquerque with ABF, Dave Green, Hot Springs, Arkansas with Werner, Rhonda Hartman out of Des Moines, Old Dominion, John Lex out of Monroe, Georgia with Walmart, David Livingston with TCW, he's out of Springfield, Georgia, Don Logan from Eskridge, Kansas with FedEx, Charlton Paul Jr., Chester, New York, UPS, Russell Simpson, South Vienna, Ohio with Holland, Todd Stein with Carbon Express, Todd's out of Altoona, Barney Earl Taylor from Orlando with Penske, and Derek Whittled out of Fieldale, Virginia with Cargo Transporters, and our good friend Kevin Birch was there as well. He is the chairman of the ATA. You know what? Might as well mention the CEOs that were there as well. Jim Berg, James Berg Trucking, Dave Congdon with Old Dominion, Mike Ducker with FedEx, Eric Fuller, U.S. Express, Neil Kedzie with Wisconsin Motor Carriers Association. Neil's been with us on the program on our old State of Trucking series. Rich McCardle, UPS, Dennis Nash with the Kennan Advantage Group, and of course Tonn Ostergard, Crete, and John Smith with CRST. We'll take a real quick break right here, and we'll be right back.